That smile cost her nothing. That was what she would remember later, not the humiliation, not the long silence that followed, not the sound of silverware against fine china pretending nothing had happened, just the smile. How easy it was, how little it took to decide. Her name was Celeste Wyndham, and she had been married to Mr. Oliver Wyndham for 9 years, 4 months and 11 days. She had not counted, she simply knew. The marriage had been arranged the autumn she turned 23, at a dinner party hosted by her father's business associate. Oliver Wyndham was 31 then, composed, well-regarded, possessed of an estate in Gloucestershire, and a reputation for good sense. Celeste had worn a pale green dress that evening and said very little. Oliver had said even less. Her father had called it a successful introduction. Her mother had pressed her hand on the carriage ride home and said, "He is steady, Celeste. Steady is what lasts." She had believed that for a time. The wedding was held in October. The estate was called Harwick Hall, and when Celeste first arrived as its mistress, she walked through every room slowly, the way you walk through a place you are trying to memorize. High ceilings, cold stone floors covered in Persian rugs, a study with a fireplace that smelled of ash even in summer, a kitchen staff of 7, 3 groundskeepers, a household ledger that had not been reconciled in 4 months. She reconciled it by the end of her first week. That was the thing no one would think to mention later, when the story was told. That from the very first week, Celeste Wyndham had put her hands into the machinery of that house and made it run. Not because she was asked. Not because Oliver noticed. She did it because the disorganization troubled her, because waste troubled her, because she had grown up in a household where her father kept careful accounts, and her mother knew to the penny what they had and what they owed. Oliver didn't ask about the accounts. He asked about dinner, occasionally, and whether the Southfield fence had been repaired, and whether a particular letter had been sent. He moved through Harwick Hall like a man who had never had to think about what kept it standing. Celeste came to understand that he simply hadn't. His mother had done it before her. Now she did it. The house ran. That was the agreement, though no one had stated it in those terms. She told herself this was normal. She told herself this in the first year, and in the second, and into the third. She read books about estate management. She learned to speak with the tenants, to negotiate with the merchants in town, to manage the social calendar that Oliver expected her to maintain, without ever discussing it with her. He would mention, at breakfast, that the Fenwicks were coming for supper on Friday, and she would simply make it happen. The menu planned, the guest rooms prepared, the conversation directed so that no silence became awkward, and no guest left dissatisfied. Oliver was always pleasant at these gatherings. He laughed easily. He told a story well. He was the kind of man who filled a room with warmth, and Celeste had noticed, over time, how often people commented on what a fine host he was. She was the host. She had arranged everything, but she smiled and said nothing, because what would she have said? And to whom? In the 4th year of their marriage, she lost a child at 4 months. Oliver had been in London at the time, attending to business. He came home 2 days later, stood in the doorway of her room, and said he was sorry. He said it the way a man says he is sorry when he has knocked over a vase, with genuine regret, and a certain helplessness, and no idea what to do with either. She had thanked him. He had left. She was back at the household ledger by the following week, because the accounts did not pause for grief, and she had found, by then, that work was the only thing that held the shape of a day when everything inside her felt liquid and wrong. She did not tell him how long she lay awake those nights. She did not tell him that she had named the child quietly, privately, a name she had never said aloud to anyone. She did not tell him, because by the 4th year, she had already learned that Oliver Wyndham was not a man who knew how to receive that kind of information. He would not have been unkind. He simply would not have known what to do, and there was something in that particular helplessness she could not bear to watch. So she kept things to herself. Small things, then larger things, then the largest things. And Oliver, for his part, did not ask. He was not cruel. He was not indifferent, exactly. He was simply elsewhere. Even when he was standing in the same room. There was a woman in the village named Mrs. Pendleton who had once said to Celeste, over tea, "You run that house like clockwork, Mrs. Wyndham." It had been meant as a compliment. Celeste had thanked her. Later, walking home through the October cold, she had thought, clockwork, yes, that was it exactly. A clock does not need to be spoken to. A clock does not need to be seen. A clock only needs to keep time. She kept time, 9 years of it. There was a man named Rafferty, Hugh Rafferty, who had been appointed as the new land agent the previous spring. He was methodical and fair-minded, and during their first meeting about the Eastern tenant leases, he had listened to Celeste's assessment of the situation for 11 straight minutes, without interrupting, and then said, "That is exactly right, Mrs. Wyndham. I don't know why it wasn't handled that way from the start." She had not known, in that moment, what to do with being agreed with. It had been so long since anyone had listened to her in a room and confirmed that what she said had value, that she had to look down at her notes to hide whatever was happening in her face. She thought about that conversation for weeks afterward, not because she harbored any feeling for Hugh Rafferty, she didn't, but because of what his attention had revealed by contrast. A simple thing, to be heard. She had gone 9 years without it, and she had not known, until someone offered it, how hungry she had become. That autumn she began, very quietly, to make arrangements. She did not plan to leave, not yet. She planned to be ready to leave, which is a different thing, though it begins the same way. She transferred a portion of the household accounts she managed, a small amount monthly, consistent with ordinary expenses, into a separate account she opened at a bank in Bristol. She made the trip herself, told no one, and listed the account in her maiden name, Celeste Harrow. When the bank clerk looked up at her, she met his eyes steadily, and he looked away first. She was not impulsive, she was precise. This was, she knew, the quality Oliver had most depended on and least acknowledged. She also began to write. Not letters. She had always written letters. Endless letters for the estate, for the social obligations, for Oliver's correspondence that he handed to her with the words, "See to this, will you?" She began to write for herself. In a small green notebook she kept in the drawer of her dressing table, underneath a layer of correspondence she knew Oliver would never look through. She wrote down what she saw, what she felt, what she had given and what had not been returned. She was not dramatic about it. She was precise about that too. Reading it back, months later, was like reading a ledger. Column after column of entries, meticulously kept, adding up to a sum she had not allowed herself to name until she saw it written down. The dinner happened on a Thursday in March. Oliver had arranged it, though arranged is generous. He had mentioned it 4 days prior, as she was reviewing the spring planting accounts, that the Blackhurst family would be joining them for dinner Thursday, along with a Mr. Dunmore from the bank and his wife. Celeste had made the arrangements. She always made the arrangements. She planned a menu suited to Mr. Dunmore's noted preference for simple English food. She had the silver polished. She instructed the kitchen on timing. She selected a dress that was appropriate without being conspicuous, because she understood that her role at these dinners was to facilitate, not to be noticed. The evening went well, by any measure. The Blackhursts were agreeable company. Mr. Dunmore told a long story about a dispute with a neighboring landowner that everyone found amusing. The wine was poured at the correct intervals. The food arrived when it should. It was near the end of the meal. The pheasant had been cleared. The dessert was coming, when Oliver turned to her. He had been telling a story about the northern property, about a negotiation he'd handled the previous autumn. She remembered that negotiation. She remembered it because she had prepared the documentation for it, had drafted 2 of the letters he'd sent, had corrected an arithmetic error in the initial offer that would have cost them significantly. She had done all of this without being asked to, simply because it needed doing, and because she was there, and because she was Celeste. Oliver was describing the final meeting. He said, "And I had the figures prepared, everything in order, and I went in knowing exactly what I was willing to offer and what I would not accept." Celeste looked at her dessert fork. He had not prepared those figures. She had. She remembered sitting at the writing desk in the library at 10:30 at night, 3 nights running, checking and rechecking the numbers while he slept. She did not say this. This was not the moment, and in any case, she had learned there was never a moment. Oliver continued the story. He was nearly at the end of it, and then he turned to her, actually looked at her across the table, and said, "Isn't that right?" And then he said a name. He said the wrong name. He said Catherine, not Celeste. Catherine. The table went quiet for a single beat. Oliver had already looked away, already moved to his conclusion, already charmed Mr. Dunmore with the punchline. The moment passed the way those moments always pass, swallowed quickly by social reflex. A laugh, a shift in attention, the arrival of dessert. Celeste smiled. She was not surprised. That was the thing she would think about later, in the dark, in the cart rattling away from Harwick Hall before the sun came up. She was not surprised. She was something else entirely. She was finished. The way a sentence is finished, the way an account is settled, not with fury, not with grief, just with the clean, definite sensation of a period placed at the end of a very long sentence. The name Catherine meant nothing and everything. Oliver had an elder sister, Catherine, who had died before Celeste ever entered their lives. He had mentioned her perhaps 4 or 5 times in 9 years. always briefly, always closing the subject quickly. Catherine had been the one who managed the house before illness took her. Catherine had been the one who understood the tenants and the accounts, and the correspondence and the social obligations, and all the rest of it. Celeste picked up her dessert fork. She ate the rest of her pudding slowly. She asked Mrs. Blackhurst about her daughter's school in London. She made sure Mr. Dunmore had brandy. She smiled at the correct moments, and was quiet at the correct moments, and saw every guest out the door with the warmth expected of the mistress of Harwick Hall. Then she went upstairs, and she sat in the chair by the window of her room, and she looked out at the dark, and she did not cry. She had cried enough in 9 years. She was not going to cry about a name. What she thought, sitting there was, he has spent 9 years living in this house, sleeping beneath this roof, eating at this table, and he does not know my name. Not because he has forgotten it, because he has never truly needed to know it, because I have been here, useful, present, tireless, invisible, and the name attached to that function did not matter. One woman, then another. The work continued, the house ran. She sat there for a long time. Then she got up and she began to pack. She was methodical about it. She was always methodical. She took only what was hers, truly hers, the things from before Harwick Hall, the small things that held her life inside them. A photograph of her mother, the green notebook, her father's watch, which he had given her because she was the careful one, the one who would keep it wound, a wool coat, 2 dresses, her correspondence folder. The ledger she had maintained for 9 years, which was hers as much as anything in this house was hers, and which she took not out of malice but because she had built it, line by line, and she would not leave it behind. She left a letter for Oliver on the writing desk in the library. She had written it 2 weeks ago, in the same way she prepared any document, thoroughly, without sentimentality, with full knowledge of the facts. It said, in part, I have managed this estate since the week we married. I have kept the accounts, maintained the correspondence, overseen the household, managed the tenants, and organized every aspect of life at Harwick Hall. I have done this without being asked, without being thanked, and, as I now understand, without being known. I do not say this to accuse you. I say it because it is true, and because I am leaving, and I thought it only fair to name what I am leaving behind. You called me by the wrong name. I am not certain you understood what you revealed. I am not Catherine, and I am not the function she once filled and I have since filled in her place. I am Celeste. I have been Celeste for 32 years, 9 of them spent in this house. I would have liked at some point for that to have mattered. I wish you well, Oliver. I mean that, but I am going. She signed it with her full name, Celeste Wyndham, all 3 of them. She left before 4 in the morning. Hugh Rafferty had arranged a cart. She had asked him, directly and without explanation, and he had agreed without asking for one, which was perhaps the first uncomplicated favor anyone had done for her in years. She sat in the back of the cart as Harwick Hall disappeared behind her in the dark, and she felt the cold March air on her face, and she thought, this is what it feels like, just this, cold and dark and moving. She had a place to go. She had arranged that too. In Bristol there was an elderly aunt, her mother's sister, Mrs. Agnes Farrow, who had written to her twice in the past year, with the same gentle suggestion. Come and stay, Celeste, for as long as you like, and help me with the bookkeeping, because I am getting too old to manage it myself. Celeste had declined both times, politely, with a reason she no longer remembered. Now she was going. She arrived at Mrs. Farrow's door at 8:30 in the morning. Her aunt opened it, looked at her for a moment, and then stepped aside without a word. She made tea. She did not ask any questions. Celeste sat at the kitchen table with her hands around the cup, and felt something she did not have an immediate name for. Not relief, exactly, not happiness. Something quieter. Space. Just a little space to breathe inside. Oliver's letter arrived 3 days later. She read it twice, standing in Mrs. Farrow's small sitting room by the window. It was longer than she had expected. He had written it himself. She could tell by the handwriting, which was less polished than the correspondence she usually drafted for him, and in it he said things she had not known he could say. That he had read her letter 4 times. That he had stood in the library and looked around at the room, and thought, for the first time, about all the things inside it he had never asked about. That he had gone to the kitchen and realized he did not know any of the staff members' names. That this had struck him with a force he was still trying to understand. He said, I did not know, Celeste. I am aware that this is not a defense. He said, I called you the wrong name. I have asked myself why, and the honest answer is that the thought did not finish itself. I turned to you the same way I have always turned to Catherine when I needed something confirmed, and I did not stop to think about what that meant. I see what it meant now. I am sorry. I know that is insufficient. I am writing it anyway, he said. I would like to learn your name properly. I would like to know what that means. I am not asking you to come home. I am asking if you would agree to meet. Celeste folded the letter carefully. She set it on the table. She sat with it for a long time. She thought about 9 years. About the ledger. About the name. She thought about what Mrs. Pendleton had said. Clockwork. She thought about the way Hugh Rafferty had listened to her in that meeting, and the fact that something as simple as being listened to had stayed with her for months. She thought about the moment at the dinner table when she had smiled. Not because she was hurt, but because she was done. And how strange and clean that feeling had been. She thought about what she wanted. This was a newer habit, and still unfamiliar. Years. She had organized what other people wanted, and managed what other people needed, and arranged what other people expected. What did she want? The question sat in her chest like something not yet fully formed. She wanted to keep the Bristol account. She wanted to keep the green notebook. She wanted to keep this room in Mrs. Farrow's house, where no one required anything of her before 8 in the morning, and sometimes she sat in the garden with tea and thought about nothing at all. She wanted, if she were honest, to be known, actually known, not managed around, not depended upon without being seen. She was not certain Oliver was capable of it. She was not certain he wasn't. She wrote back. Her letter was shorter than his. She wrote, I am not coming back to Harwick Hall. I want you to understand that clearly before we discuss anything else. I am not the person who runs the house while you run the estate. If we are going to speak, we are going to speak as two people, with names, on equal ground. I am willing to meet. I am not willing to pretend. She signed it Celeste. Just that. Just her name. They met 3 weeks later at a hotel in Bath. Neutral ground, which had been her condition. Oliver arrived before her, and stood when she entered the dining room. He looked, she thought, like a man who had been thinking very hard for 21 days, and was still not finished. There were lines around his eyes she did not remember from before. Or perhaps she had simply not looked. He said. Just that, her name. Said plainly, precisely, looking directly at her. She sat down across from him. She thought very clearly. So, here we are. They talked for 2 hours. She told him things she had kept in the green notebook. He listened. Not perfectly, not without the occasional instinct to explain himself, which she stopped him on twice politely and without apology. But he listened. He asked questions she hadn't expected. He said, at one point, I don't think I understood that you weren't happy. And she said steadily, you didn't ask. And he said no, I didn't. That was not a resolution. She knew better than to call it one. A man does not change over tea and Bath because his wife left him. He might change. He might not. She had read enough of human nature, in 9 years of managing people and situations and the 10,000 daily negotiations of a household, to know that change of any real substance was slow and effortful, and not guaranteed. But he had said her name. He had looked at her when he said it. That was something. It was not everything, but it was something. And she was by nature a precise woman. She had learned to work with what was real. She told him she would remain in Bristol. She told him she would speak with him again, and that she would decide, slowly and on her own terms, what came next. She told him she would not return to a life she was invisible in. He said, I understand. She said, I hope so. Walking out of that dining room into the early April afternoon, she felt the sun on the back of her hands and thought of nothing in particular, not of Oliver, not of the estate, not of the next meeting or the one after that. Just the sun. Just her own hands. Just the feeling of walking somewhere without already knowing what would be required of her when she arrived. She did not know yet what her life would look like, from here. She had some money of her own, in an account in her own name, in her own city. She had a green notebook full of true things. She had a room in her aunt's house that smelled of lavender and old paper. She had for the first time in 9 years, a day that did not begin with someone else's needs. What she had decided, that night at the dinner table in the moment between the wrong name and the dessert fork, was not where to go or what to do, or even whether to leave. What she had decided was simpler than any of those things. She had decided at last to be Celeste. To take up that much space at minimum. To insist on that small essential fact. Her name was Celeste Wyndham. She was 32 years old. She was starting. That was enough. That was, she thought, exactly enough to begin with.